Digimon World, released on the PS1 in Japan in 1999, in America in the year 2000, and finally in PAL territories in 2001. Man, we used to get screwed when it came to getting releases back then. Still do a lot of the time. In the early 2000s, there was a bit of a battle going on for dominance of the monster-raising video games genre. There was of course the winner by far, Pokemon, and then there was the smaller players, Digimon and Monster Rancher. Digimon may not have ever even compared to the Goliath that is Pokemon, but it certainly did etch out its own little hardcore fanbase. And a lot of these fans were certainly won over by the anime series, which is pretty damn good looking back on it, and it certainly is better than the Pokemon anime. I know, shots fired. But I think another big chunk were won over by this fantastic PS1 game. I know I certainly was. You couldn't get me off the damn thing when I was young, and it's still a lot of fun to play now, and now I'm going to tell you what makes it so goddamn great. Digimon World starts with a CG animated cutscene like every other PS1 game of this era. Look at this horrifying face! And in this cutscene, you see your main character coming home from school to find his mum is not home and he has to make some dinner for himself. Then you get sucked into your Digimon Tamagotchi thing, as you do, and you see in the pitch black darkness, Digimon, this game's version of Yoda or something, and you get some personal questions from him which determine what Digimon you're going to get first. Then you name yourself and your Digimon. Then you awaken in File City. Digimon then explains the situation to you in his little Yoda hut. All the civilized Digimon have gone mental, and you've got to knock some sense into them by bringing them to the brink of death. When you do this, they all return to the city and fulfill some function, like opening an item shop or opening an item bank or something like that. This is basically what you do throughout the whole game. The different people you recruit will often give you a bit more info on what's going on the island, but that's about it. And once you've recruited the right amount of people, you go into the Infinity Mountain, and that's where the game's final boss is. As stories go, it's not the most in-depth, but that's not what this game is about. It's more about exploring this strange and coolly designed world and growing attached to your little Digimon. While you'd assume this game would just be another Pokemon clone game that was made to cash in on the monster trend at the time, it really isn't. There's no leveling like you do in Pokemon, and you don't have more than one monster to deal with at a time. And to be honest with you, the game's systems are rather complex. You have just one Digimon who evolves through 5 different stages of Digimon, and after a certain amount of time in game has passed, your Digimon will die. You don't get that in Pokemon, do you? Unless we're talking about Gary's Raticate. But don't worry, this game believes in resurrection, so your Digimon is reborn every time it dies, and you get a selection of different coloured eggs which determine which new set of Digimon you will get. Every different starter Digimon has its own different Digimon that it can turn into, and every time it evolves you get a different set of branching paths of evolution, so unlike Pokemon there's usually more than one Digimon that a Digimon can evolve into. Most of the game is spent raising your Digimon, and there's certainly a lot of things to worry about when you're training and caring for your Digimon. You've got to keep an eye on what they need as they get hungry and need to go poop just like the rest of us, and they'll let you know about it with a little speech bubble above their heads. If they need to poo, you've got to take them to the nearest toilet or give them a porta potty that you can't really get till later on in the game. And if you don't make it to the toilet in time, they'll poo on the floor, and that poo will stay there for the rest of the game as a reminder of your failure as a human being. But you can get rid of them later on if you happen to raise your Digimon so poorly that you end up with a Numamon or a Sukamon. They're Digimon that eat poo and throw poo at your enemies. If you're not using a guide, you'll probably end up with one at some point, so don't feel too bad. And you can feed your Digimon by getting food from the meat farm. Yes, you heard me right, a meat farm. Don't question it. You get a few pieces of meat every day. Early on in the game you'll often run out of food, so you'll have to gather extra food from the forest surrounding the town. If you fail at doing any of these things, you will get a discipline mistake against your Digimon, which is important in which monster you want to evolve your monster into. Every monster also gets tired and needs sleep at certain times of the day. This also serves as your main way of saving the game. There's no saves when you want here, kids, which can be annoying at times, but I guess that's just how games were back in my day. During the war, when we got the army rations from the officer who would come round on the weekends, and then we'd have to make sure the air raid siren was all good, and then we'd fire up the PS1 with our coal-powered generator, and not be able to save exactly when we wanted to. Those were the days. I remember exactly when the wheel was invented. As I said earlier, you don't level up with experience points like you would in the Pokemon games. Instead, you have 6 different stats to worry about: HP, MP, offense, defense, speed, and brains. Each one of them pretty much do what they say on the tin. You raise these stats by taking your Digimon to the game's training area, where there's different machines for each stat. You don't have any control over the actual training session though. These stats determine which monster you will get when the time comes for your Digimon to evolve, along with weight and other care factors. But the problem with this is that the game hides all this information under the hood, so there's no way of knowing what Digimon you're going to get other than through trial and error. I wish they'd let you have a way of slowly unlocking hints about how to get certain Digimon, like they did in the newer one. Of course, these days playing the game you can just go on the internet and get all the info you need, but back in the day this was a bit of an annoyance. It may seem like a small thing, but it really makes a massive difference. As a kid I found this game very difficult, but coming back to it with a guide to hand I found it a whole lot easier, and honestly a whole lot more enjoyable because of it. Without a guide, it was very hard to end up with an ultimate because they have very specific stats that you need to raise, and a scattershot approach usually wouldn't help you that much. But this is just a retrospective nitpick that has kind of been sorted out by technology. The rest of the game is wandering around the game's strange landscape, beating up wild Digimon and recruiting Digimon that have gone mental with a sort of amnesia. The wild Digimon are basically this game's version of random battles, but instead of battles that just randomly happen, you see them on the screen like you would in, say, Chrono Trigger. You can avoid them if you don't feel like fighting, which is nice when your Digimon is dying for a shit, but if you happen to collide with them, it's fighting time. The battles in the game are kind of like a proto-Ni no Kuni battle system where you don't exactly have direct control of your Digimon, but you can sort of suggest what they should do. The brains stat determines what commands you have at your disposal, but when you start out you basically have no control and you're stuck with auto and run. But as you level up your Digimon's brains stat, you get access to the attack, moderate, switch, distance, defend, and finally you get the ability to choose what moves they do straight up. The only thing other than this is special moves that every Digimon has. It's activated after your finish meter fills up, but be careful with your timing, as if you activate it when the enemy has started an attack animation you'll get hit and you won't get to do your special. You can also power up your special move by tapping the shoulder buttons as quick as you can. You also have a few status effects that can happen. There's poison, which, slowly drains your health as you move, paralysis, where you can't move for a few seconds, and a effect where your Digimon turns into a little 8-bit version of itself and has weakened attacks for a time. Each Digimon has their own set of free moves that they can use. Depending on what Digimon you have, they'll have access to different sets of moves, much like in Pokemon. The way you acquire new moves is by battling a Digimon that has the move you want over and over again until you get the move you want, which is honestly kind of annoying because there's no set amount of battles that will give you the move, and maybe it's more to do with how many times you're hit with the move, but it just seems a little bit too random to me. But once you've learnt the move, every other Digimon you get after that will be able to learn that move, which is quite nice. And at the end of each battle, you'll get some money and a few small stat boosts, and sometimes you might get an item. The battles with the ex-residents of File City basically act as boss battles. They're generally a lot tougher than the wild Digimon that are running around, but you don't always have to just simply battle them to recruit them to the city. Sometimes they'll want you to do something for them, maybe you have to do a specific event involving that Digimon. This definitely helps keep things fresh. There really isn't much more to it than that. You can basically take on the game in whatever order you choose. It's like an older school version of an open world game, and I think it might have been the first open world game I ever played. The game is just so damn relaxing to play with its use of a lot of ambient noise, and there's very little music to speak of in the game, but the tunes that are there are great, and every time I hear them it's just like a magical time travel machine back to my childhood. Dee-dee-dee-dee, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. And for the time, the graphics aren't too bad, quite honestly. The Digimon themselves are well animated, and the environments are well designed and nice to look at. It kind of has a Final Fantasy feel to it. This stuff really helps you get immersed and have a connection with your little digital creature. At times, the game can be very esoteric and confusing, but I think that's just mainly a product of the time it was released. Have a guide handy to explain all the random things that aren't explained well enough, and I think even now you're going to have a blast with this game, and it's definitely worth buying or emulating. Thank you for watching, and I will see you later.